The world has just witnessed the largest military operation in the Western Hemisphere since the 1989 invasion of Panama. Executed under the shroud of a cold January moon, Operation Absolute Resolve has accomplished what many geopoliticians considered impossible. In less than 90 minutes, the strategic map of South America was torn apart and completely redesigned. There was no need for D-Day-style massive amphibious landings, nor a medieval protracted siege of the city of Caracas. What we saw was a surgical decapitation, a demonstration of force so precise that it has left the global community in a state of absolute shock. We are talking about a regime that had survived 2 decades of internal plots, devastating economic sanctions, and unprecedented diplomatic pressure. But on the night of January 3rd, 2026, time simply ran out. Today is January 5th, 2026. Little more than 48 hours have passed since elements of Delta Force and the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit extracted Nicolas Maduro from his fortified bunker at Fuerte Tiuna. As the world processes the images of Maduro sitting in a federal detention center in New York, wearing the standard orange jumpsuit and awaiting a historic trial for narco-terrorism, the real battle is just beginning on the ground. Washington is officially in charge of Venezuela. The implications for global oil markets, the regional security architecture, and the very future of the Monroe Doctrine are of a magnitude we are only beginning to grasp. This is Warfare Report. Today, we step away from the superficial headlines to dive deep into the heart of the strategy. We will analyze the day after, the tactical minutiae of the incursion, and the strategic reality of a nation of 30 million people under direct U.S. military control. To understand the success of Operation Absolute Resolve, we must analyze the technology that made it possible. This operation did not begin with gunfire, it began with bits. Military intelligence confirms that U.S. Cyber Command initiated the silent phase approximately 6 hours before the first boots touched Venezuelan soil. Using infiltration protocols developed in conjunction with Israeli intelligence, Washington deployed a denial-of-service and signal spoofing attack that completely blinded Venezuela's air defense network. The Chinese-made JY-27 radars, the pride of the Bolivarian surveillance system, showed nothing but static. The feared Russian S-300VM missile batteries, which supposedly made the skies of Caracas an impenetrable zone, never received a launch order. Their targeting systems were locked in an electronic cloud generated by EA-18G Growler electronic warfare aircraft operating from the Caribbean. When the MH-60M Black Hawk helicopters of the 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, the famous Night Stalkers, crossed the coastline near La Guaira, they were ghosts in the machine, flying at extremely low altitudes, using the terrain of the coastal range as a natural shield. These aircraft avoided all visual or acoustic contact until it was too late for the guards at Miraflores Palace in Fuerte Tiuna. However, we must be clear. A tactical military success does not guarantee long-term strategic success. As the sun rose on January 4th, the Venezuelan state did not just suffer a coup, it suffered a systemic dissolution. The National Bolivarian Armed Forces, FANB, which on paper boasted nearly 150,000 active personnel and a militia reserve exceeding 1 million, simply evaporated. Most high-ranking officers, faced with direct communication from the Pentagon offering a binary choice: total immediate amnesty if they remained in their barracks, or selective elimination via MQ-9 Reaper drones if they attempted to mobilize, chose survival. This mass desertion avoided an initial bloodbath, but it has created an unprecedented power vacuum. At this moment, Venezuela's chain of command has been replaced by a cordon of surveillance, led by the U.S. 4th Fleet and the men of the 22nd MEU. Caracas is under martial law, patrolled by drones and special forces, while the world watches to see if order can emerge from the chaos. We cannot analyze this intervention without talking about the elephant in the room: energy. Venezuela possesses more than 300 billion barrels of proven crude. These are the largest reserves on planet Earth, surpassing even those of Saudi Arabia. For 2 decades, these reserves were used by the Caracas-Moscow-Beijing axis as a geopolitical weapon against Western interests. Now, those reserves are the primary prize and the #1 priority of the Trump administration's second term. The narrative in Washington is transparent. American oil giants will be the architects of the new Venezuela. Barely 48 hours after the operation began, an elite unit called the Special Energy Task Force was established. At Southern Command headquarters in Florida, executives from Chevron, ExxonMobil, and Halliburton are already sitting down with military planners. They aren't discussing democracy. They are discussing the logistics of extraction. The goal is audacious and, for many analysts, nearly impossible: to restore the oil infrastructure that Chavismo allowed to rot and double national production to 2 million barrels per day within just 24 months. This is where the math of the blockade comes into play. Recall that before Operation Absolute Resolve, the Fourth Fleet was already maintaining an iron ring around Venezuelan territorial waters, strangling the so-called ghost fleet of tankers evading sanctions. Now that blockade has shifted from an interdiction mission to an escort mission. By militarily securing the Orinoco oil belt and the Paraguaná refining complex, Washington is not just looking to rebuild a failed nation. When the underlying strategic objective is to break the backbone of OPEC. If a US-managed Venezuela begins to flood global markets, Brent crude prices could drop to the 40 per barrel range. This would not only benefit the American consumer, it would be a death blow to the economies of Russia and Iran, which depend on high prices to fund their own war efforts. Yet the cost of this gift is astronomical. Decades of lack of maintenance, corruption, and brain drain have left the state-owned PDVSA as a rusted corpse. Experts estimate that a capital investment of at least $110 billion will be needed over the next decade just to stabilize the system. The Treasury Department has already begun asset reassignment, moving Venezuelan gold seized in London and funds in escrow accounts to pay this bill. For the average citizen in Caracas, the promise is Pax Americana and a believer pegged to the dollar. For the U.S. taxpayer, the promise is that the oil will pay for the war. But if history has taught us anything, it is that these promises are usually written in blood. Absolute resolve is not just a regional action. It is the loudest message sent to the Kremlin and Beijing in decades. It is the Monroe Doctrine 2.0 in its maximum kinetic expression. Washington has drawn a red line in the soil of the Amazon rainforest. The Western Hemisphere is not, and will not be, a zone contested by extracontinental powers. Russia's reaction has been virulent in rhetoric, but weak in action. Moscow has called Maduro's extraction a flagrant imperialist aggression. However, with the Russian army bogged down in the Ukrainian theater of operations and its financial resources at their limit, the Kremlin's response has been limited to cyber attacks and the hasty evacuation of its last military advisors and Wagner Group mercenaries. Russia has lost its most important foothold in the Americas, and with it, its ability to project a real threat toward the southern flank of the United States. China, on the other hand, is playing a much more complex game of chess. Beijing is Venezuela's largest creditor, with a debt exceeding $60 billion. This debt was guaranteed by oil shipments that the Pentagon now controls. Reports from secondary diplomatic channels suggest that Washington is using this debt as a massive bargaining chip. The message to Beijing is simple: if you want to recover your investment, stay out of the South China Sea and do not interfere with our transition in Caracas. It is a high-stakes gamble that could redefine relations between the two superpowers for the rest of the century. At the regional level, the map has also shifted. Brazil, under the Lula administration, has officially condemned the violation of Venezuelan sovereignty in international forums. But in practice, it has moved its Embraer R-99 surveillance aircraft to the border to tacitly cooperate with Southern Command. No one in the region wants a refugee overflow or a prolonged civil war. Colombia has become the nerve center for logistics. The airports of Bogotá and Cúcuta are now air bridges through which thousands of tons of humanitarian aid, and of course, heavy military equipment to secure the transition, flow. Washington's goal is to surround Venezuela with a wall of pro-American sentiment and military force, leaving the last regime loyalists with nowhere to hide. But there is a wild card that no one can control: the 8 million Venezuelans in exile. If a massive and disorganized wave of repatriation begins before the electrical grid and food supply are stabilized, the resulting chaos could overwhelm any capacity of the U.S.-led interim administration. We come to the darkest part of our analysis. Although the decapitation of Maduro's figurehead was a textbook success, the dismantling of the system he and Hugo Chavez built over 25 years is far from a reality. At the Pentagon, analysts fear what they call Scenario 2, the quagmire. The so-called cartel of the Suns, that network of generals involved up to their necks in cocaine trafficking, still has thousands of members at large. These men do not fight for a socialist ideology. They fight for their lives and their wealth. Many have traded their uniforms for civilian clothes and retreated to the country's most inaccessible areas or popular barrios. This is where the colectivos come in. These armed militias have been the regime's street-level enforcers of terror. They are decentralized structures deeply rooted in communities and with access to secret arsenals. U.S. intelligence estimates that before Maduro's fall, thousands of assault rifles, RPG rocket launchers, and man-portable air defense systems, MANPADS, were distributed in the neighborhoods of Caracas and the southern mining regions. If the 22nd Marine Expeditionary Unit is forced to transition from a liberation force to an urban police force, the parallel with Iraq in 2003 becomes inevitable and disturbing. Attacks with improvised explosive devices, IEDs on Caracas highways, snipers operating from the Petare labyrinths, and constant sabotage of pipelines could turn an order maintenance mission into a war of attrition costing Washington billions of dollars a month. Washington is trying to avoid this by using a limited footprint model. They are positioning Democratic opposition figures like Maria Corina Machado or members of the Transition Council to be the public face of the new government. But there is a real risk. If the people perceive these leaders simply as Pentagon puppets, nationalist resistance could unite factions that were previously enemies. Legitimacy is the scarcest currency in an occupation zone, and without it, the Pax Americana will last only as long as the fuel in the Abrams tanks patrolling the Capitol. Venezuela of 2026 is the most ambitious and dangerous geopolitical experiment of the 21st century. For the Trump administration, it is an all-or-nothing bet that will define its historical legacy. If the plan succeeds, the United States will have secured its energy independence for the next century, stabilized its backyard, and dealt a death blow to the influence of Russia, China, and Iran on the continent. It would be, without a doubt, the greatest strategic victory for Washington since the end of the Cold War. But if the plan fails, Venezuela will become the Afghanistan of South America, a resource-rich nation turned into an ungovernable crater, an open wound in the heart of the hemisphere, fueled by drug money and endless guerrilla warfare. A conflict that could drag an entire generation of American soldiers into an urban fight in a concrete jungle. As we close this report, the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford continues to patrol off the coast of La Guaira. Its F-35 fighters continue to soar through the Venezuelan sky, reminding everyone who has control of the air. But as we have learned in the last 20 years of global warfare, dominating the sky is easy. The hard part is dominating the ground and the hearts of the people. The day after has passed. The new era has begun. Whether this era will be remembered as one of liberation and prosperity, or as a new type of colonial conflict, will depend on how deep the United States is willing to drive the spear and how much blood it is willing to pay for the Orinoco oil. This is Warfare Report. We are monitoring every troop movement on the ground, every shift in the oil markets, and every reaction from global powers in real time. This is a developing story that changes by the hour. For deep technical analysis and geopolitical truths you won't find in traditional media, subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell. We want to hear your opinion in the comments section. Do you think Operation Absolute resolve was the only way to stabilize the region, or has a Pandora's box been opened that the United States will not be able to close? Let's analyze the strategy together. Stay informed. Stay ahead. Until the next report.